Jesus was the greatest storyteller of all time. And we're, most of us, if we've been in church very long, familiar with most of his stories, particularly the big two, which are the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan. We've heard those stories, many of us, for years and years and years. And we're the better for it. But what often happens with the stories of Christ is they're extrapolated. They're pulled from the context of the gospel narrative, and they're kind of retold. They're what we might call atomized. Instead of seeing it one pearl on a pearl necklace, we just take that one pearl out and make of it a different piece of jewelry. So what ends up happening is the stories become at the preacher's discretion. And its context, really, the original context in which the story was told, that helps us understand its real thrust, its real purpose. We could pull a particular story out and we could almost use it as like Aesop's fables, where we are, through the story of Christ, teaching people to value particular things that may not have been the original cause or purpose for which Jesus told the story. So on this Father's Day, I want us to take a look at the context and the story in context of Jesus' probably most famous story, the prodigal son. In case you don't recall, that's in Luke 15. So if you have a Bible or a Bible app on your phone, would you open up your Bible? Would you pull out your phone? And I want you to find Luke chapter 15. And in the first couple of verses, we're going to see the context in which Jesus will ultimately tell the prodigal son story. But it's actually part of a triad, or three stories. And it's the last of these three. So Luke chapter 15, I want you to look and follow along as I read verses 1 and 2. That's going to set the stage. That's going to give us the context for which these stories were intended. So Luke 15, verse 1. It says, "Now all of the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near him," that is Jesus, "to listen to him." The tax collectors and sinners were coming near to Jesus to listen to him. And in verse 2, a problem arises. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." Now there's the context. A bunch of ragamuffins and scallywags are all around Jesus. And the holy people, the Pharisees and the scribes, they're having a problem with this. And we're going to kind of read between the lines just a little bit and try to get into their heads based on the stories that Jesus tells them. It's as if they're saying, "Okay, Jesus, we're not buying it, your whole messianic claim. You claim to be the Messiah. We haven't seen enough compelling evidence yet. But what we are looking at, what we are seeing, is dismaying to us. You're hanging out with the wrong type of people. You're hanging out with losers, sinners, scallywags, prostitutes, drunkards. I mean, you're a friend of all these people. And that says to us, you are not, in fact, qualified to be the Christ. You're not Christy enough to be our Christ. You're definitely not messianic material. And moreover, the Pharisees might even be saying to Jesus, look, you claim to be the Son of God. You claim that God is your Father. What would your Father say about you hanging out with these people? I mean, clearly God has told us, you ought not be hanging around this riffraff. I mean, the scriptures point to the holiness of God and condemn these people as sinners. I mean, don't you think that you ought to be over here with us if you're really having any real contention with running for Messiah? We're probably going to be your constituency, not those garbage rats. What does your Father think, Jesus, about you hanging out with these types of people? You see, this is the context in which the story is ultimately going to be told. This is the context which really sets us up to help us understand exactly what is it that Jesus is driving at. He's going to tell them three stories. The first two are brief, and then the last one is the prodigal son story. We're familiar with it just a little bit. But let's look at the first story. Jesus responds as the ultimate storyteller to their complaint, their grumbling, by telling a story. So it says here in verse 3, "So he told them this parable. And this is what he said. What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep which was lost.'" Now, it seems like a quaint little story. But when you kind of begin to feel your way through the story and think your way through the story, what ends up happening is that we're going to get a portrait of the very heart of heaven through this parable. How many of you have dogs? Hands? Anyone? How many of you have ever lost a dog? It is one of the worst feelings in the world. You will lose your mind if you lose your dog. You will drive through a neighborhood yelling your dog's name no matter how embarrassing that dog's name is. You got a poodle for your wife for your 30th anniversary. She decided to name the poodle Pikachu. You don't even know what that means. It doesn't matter because the minute Pikachu runs out the screen door of the lanai and it's disappeared somewhere off into the neighborhood, you will find yourself driving around out of your very studly SUV and yelling, Pikachu, Pikachu, because there's something deep inside your gut where something extremely valuable to you, or at least your wife, is lost, and you are compelled to find it. Well, not everybody can identify with the emotionalism of losing a dog. Some of you are way too sophisticated and elegant for that. You've invested in the stock market. Well, see, the interesting thing about a shepherd is that not only was a sheep a bit of a pet, kind of like our dog, but it was also an investment. It was their business. So you can imagine if you've invested in the stock market, you and Buffy, and you're checking every day to see where your investment's at in the rise or fall of the pandemic. Some of you check your stock way too often, and you know who you are. So here's the deal. There's this pit of your stomach thing when you see the stock market sink. There's this pit of your stomach thing when you lose Pikachu, the poodle. Even if you don't care, it's your wife's dog. She puts it in her purse, and you've got to find that thing, so out you look. Well, imagine in the first century a shepherd. It's this confounded, doubled up thing. It's not only a vulnerable, pet-like beastie, it's also an investment. So you may find yourself out there with your shepherd's crook. I'm going to give Sean the business as he's trying to track me on the camera here. There's the shepherd, and he's counting yet again, this time not to fall asleep, but he's counting to 100 over and over and over. I have 4 kids. Do you know how many times I've counted to the number of 4 in my life? A lot. We're walking through an amusement park, and this is what I do all day long. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're good. 1, 2, 3, 4. I get in the van. Do you know what I do? I look in the rearview mirror and I count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we can go to church. I get out of church, I get in the van. I'm about to drive home. You know what I do? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, see, if I'm a shepherd, I count to 100. At least this particular shepherd had to do that daily. And he gets to 99 and he realizes his favorite little fluffy beastie is gone. No. So he begins yelling, not Pikachu, but Wooly. Wooly. And he's waiting for that sound. The sound that all shepherds long to hear somewhere off in the distance when a sheep is lost. He just wants to hear it. He calls out thrice, Wooly. Meh. Oh, the relief. The relief. You found your poodle. The poodle is back in the lanai. The poodle is back in your wife's purse in the lanai, and I don't even know why she keeps it there. It's hot. Let the dog go. He finds it in all of the relief that overwhelms him. He's so glad. He throws the sheep on his shoulder, then he carries it back triumphantly to the flock. He's no longer having that terror feeling because this object of value, this sweet thing that he loves, has returned. And so it says in this conclusion, it says in verse 6, he comes home and he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me. Rejoice with me. High fives all around. You remember before we all lost our mind and started wearing bandit masks, how we used to high five? I'm just looking forward to the day. No, we will again. I'm looking forward to the day where we can high five and belly slam together again. I just want us to high five and belly slam over the victories of Jesus and all of the other wonderful things in life. I'm kind of tired of getting and doing this. Ready? Here we go. High five. Yeah, no, 6 feet high fives don't work. And this is the thing that men do. We high five during football games, hockey games, etc. I'm from Detroit. That's how hockey slipped out. But you get the point. High five. You found your sheep. And so you tell your friends. Now, Jesus draws the moral of the story. Look at the last verse, verse 7 in this little short story. He says, I tell you, in the same way there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Remember, the Pharisees and the scribes are complaining because Jesus is hanging out with riffraff. The Pharisees and scribes may be asking, Jesus, you're claiming to be the Son of God. What would your Father think about this? So Jesus tells this quaint little parable, and then he draws it, the moral of the story. He says, look, all of heaven rejoices over one sinner who repents. The Pharisees know their Bible. The scribes, they know the Scriptures. And they know full well it's not that easy. I mean, just because heaven rejoices does not mean that Yahweh, God, rejoices. I mean, after all, heaven's been involved in a rebellion before. You could have citizens up in heaven that might like stuff that God the Father doesn't much care for. Surely there's freedom of preference up there. So that doesn't quite assuage their complaint. That doesn't quite answer their question. They turn back to Jesus, it appears, a second time, at least in their heads, because he gives them a second story, and they say, yes, but what does God the Father think? No, we're not talking about all of heaven. We're talking about God the Father. So Jesus does what a great storyteller does. He tells them a second story. Look at verse 8, bless you. This is what it says. Jesus here is appealing to the ladies, all the ladies. Verse 8, let's get with the fairer of the species here. Or what woman? You see, the first story was addressed to men. This story is addressed to women. What woman, if she's lost 10 silver coins and loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully for it until she finds it? And when she's found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I found the coin which I had lost. So you might not have lost a poodle in your life. You may not have invested in the stock market and watched the up and down of the value added and lost. But I have a feeling every lady in the house at one point or another has lost their purse or their keys or their credit card. At my house, it happens every day. My wife says to me, where did I put my purse? And I love her, but I think to my, you gave him the look. She looked over and was like, see, I'm not the only one. And he went, yes, you are, dear. So here's the point, right? My wife every day says to me, where did I put my purse? Or where did I put my phone? Or I haven't seen my credit card since the Amazon order. Have you? And the answer is, no, I don't know. I have a hard enough time tracking my purse, which, by the way, is called a man bag. So there it is. Ladies, you can identify. There's this something churny, this compulsion to be able to find your purse. And this lady has 10 coins. You remember back when money was made of metal? When I began preaching, there was this thing that happened every week. I would preach a sermon, and as we drove toward the end, we were going to have an invitation, and you had an altar call. But you knew that there was some really good father or mother in the crowd who was trying to teach her child, little Stevie. She was trying to teach little Stevie to be a good steward and to tithe. And for whatever reason, every single Sunday, just before the altar call, while everybody was prepping for the end of the sermon, they knew the plate would be passed after the altar call. This well-intentioned mother or father would reach into their pocket or change purse and pull out what sounded like 854 nickels. Now, if you've never done this, you pull out your change purse and you hand them to little Stevie, whose little ravioli hands really aren't quite big enough for 854 nickels, but you hand it to him because it's going to make a very impressive rattle when the metal plate goes by. Young people, we used to do that back in the olden days. But little Stevie's little ravioli hands weren't big enough, so the nickels would fall onto the floor. So right as I was making everybody weep for their love of Jesus, you'd hear this pa-ching, pa-ching, pa-ching as all the nickels hit the tile floor. And that's okay because most nickels have a narrow edge, so they're just going to clatter for a moment, bounce, and then stop on the tile. But you know there's going to be at least one defiant nickel. That nickel that's going to defy gravity and find its edge, its round edge, 1/16 of an inch thick, and somehow manage to go 600 yards across the 34-yard worship center and roll up the tile, and everybody's going to listen to it. The sermon is a moot point at that moment. I might as well stop. Well, everybody starts chanting, go, 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 for the nickel, which is still rolling now. And then, when it finally stops its forward momentum, this nickel's not going to die easy like a Christ-loving nickel. This nickel's probably satanic because it's going to begin a pirouette. It's going to begin the world's longest Russian ballet pirouette, and it's going to be real loud while it does it. Whoop, 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 whoop. then I could keep reaching. Well, that's exactly what this woman is listening for. So she turns on every light in the house. She's lost her purse, she's lost her coin. So she begins sweeping. She's diligently sweeping, and she's listening for the sound. So just as the shepherd is saying, "Wooly," and listening for the ah, she's listening for the clink-a-dink of the wonderful coin that she's lost. And when you find your purse, what's the first thing you do, ladies? You reach in that purse, and you grab your cell phone, and you call your gal pal, and you say, "Marjorie, it took me over an hour to find the purse, and do you know where it was?" You're not going to, no, that would have made sense. That's not where it was. I left it on the roof of the car in the garage. Oh, isn't that a hoot? That's a hoot. Marjorie's lost her purse before. She knows how it feels, and she's going to rejoice with you. You see, the men in the room, they had all lost their investments. They had lost their pets in times past. So Jesus says, look, all of heaven rejoices. Rejoice with me. I found what was lost. And all the ladies have lost a purse at one point or another, or, put something aside that they valued. And what happens? It says, verse 9, when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors saying, rejoice with me. That's the second time we've seen that phrase. There's a party going on. Rejoice with me. I found the coin which I had lost. Verse 10, here's the moral of the story. This is story number 2. In the same way, I tell you, there's joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Compare with me verse 7 and verse 10. Notice that verse 7 is vague, it's broad. All of heaven rejoices. Verse 10, on the other hand, is a little bit more specific. We're now zooming in. The spotlight is growing tighter on the stage. We're now talking about the angels of God being happy over one sinner who repents, that they rejoice. So we've gone from all of heaven to a more specific group around the throne. The angels of God around the throne are rejoicing over one sinner who repents. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees take on one of those villainous, type of English accents at this point to let you know that they're the evil villain in the Sherlock Holmes films. And they say, yes, that may be true, but we just want to know. Tell us, man. What does your father think about you doing this, hanging out with this riffraff? You see, he still really hasn't answered their accusation. He still hasn't remedied their query. They want to know, look, it's Father's Day. Tell us a Father's Day story. Fair enough, he says. Now, we're accustomed to hearing the prodigal son story as exactly that, a story about a prodigal son. But watch the way Jesus starts the story. Verse 11. Here's the third and last story for the morning. Jesus says, a man had 2 sons. Now, clearly, he's driving to a point as that spotlight zooms in, those concentric circles draw near into the center of the bullseye. He's gone from all of heaven to the angels of God in heaven, and now he's specifically honing in exactly on a father who has 2 sons, and we'll find out that these sons are kind of types of sons. But in the story, they're actual storied sons. And the Pharisees, at least in the beginning, are going to agree with Jesus on some theological points in this story. And you know the story, so follow along as I read it rather quickly. Verse 12. A man has 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them, that is the 2 sons. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now, at this point, finally, Jesus and the Pharisees are on the same page. They're on the same level about what's going on theologically. Finally, Jesus, it seems, is capitulating and now having to give an answer. What would the Father say about a sinful wretch? And this son is a perfect depiction of a sinful wretch. This son, just in case you missed the first century nuance, comes to his father and says, hey, look, Pop. Now, most of you with kids are accustomed to your kid coming to you and asking them for money. Hey, Dad, can I borrow $50? Hey, Dad, I need a new fuel injector. Hey, Dad, I need more money for tuition. Hey, Dad, books are outrageous this year. Hey, Dad, and you're accustomed. It's almost like you whip out a $5 bill every time your kids approach. However, this kid and his offense is way different than that. This is not just milking off the old man. This is saying to the pops, you're dead to me. Let's just get this over with. Let's pretend like you died. I'm going to go my way. You go yours. My brother, he can do whatever he wants. Come on. You know he's your favorite. I'm tired of this stuff. Just give me what's mine. And the father somehow obliges. Now, the Pharisees and the scribes, they would look and go, that sounds about right. That's about what humanity did to God the Father. Look, we're not interested in a relationship with you, Pa. That's all we want to do is get the goods that you've created and we'll move on. Then, just to accentuate the negative, Jesus goes on to describe what this kid does that's so famous. That's why we call him the prodigal, the loose son, the one who's loose or liberal in his living. So again, look down, verse 13. Not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now again, think like a first century Jew if you can. The kid is going to a foreign land. Jesus doesn't even name the land. It's any other land other than Israel as a betrayal. And moreover, what we're going to learn is that this kid is going to so squander his living, or that money with loose living, that he's going to be hungry, so hungry that he ends up getting a job feeding pigs, which for a Jew is a double, triple insult. Father, you're dead to me. Take the money. Now you're going to squander the money. Now you're going to work for a pagan, taking care of pigs, and then it's going to get even worse. Alpo can time. Now, for those of you that weren't here in the first service, think back in that wonderful experience that you've had if you are a dog owner, and if you're not, cranberry sauce in your mind will work just as easily. How many of you have ever opened up a can of dog food, Alpo in particular, and you've opened it up with a can opener, and you've turned the can upside down over a dog dish, and you went like this, and you shook it, and you waited for the vacuum seal to go, and this thing plops down into the dog dish in the exact same shape as the can itself, only it's a meat byproduct of some sort or another. Well, what this kid did is get so desperate, so deplorable, and so lost that when he was putting the Alpo down or the pig slop down, he thought to himself, now that looks yummy. And he reached over and grabbed a spoon from the kitchen drawer, and right before he delved into that thing, face first, to satiate whatever was longing in his guts, thank God for the famine that God had sent. And thank God for a light bulb that can go off. Verse 14, now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and he hired himself out into one of the citizens of that country, any other country other than Israel. And he sent him into the fields to feed swine, and he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, the light bulb. Oh, the light bulb. Praise God for the light bulb. I'm about to go into darkness so deep. I'm about to go into disgusting so deep, but something happens, and there's a snap where you almost just snap out of it and wake up. He has this epiphany, this epiphanal moment, and he says, wow, verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I'm dying here with hunger? I'll get up and I'll go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven, and in your sight I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up. Now at this point, the Pharisees are happy. We have to guess they're finally getting their complaint recognized. And there's about to be a collision course between a sinful son, likened unto the garbage Jesus is palling around with, and an esteemed father. And the esteemed father, he's a lot like the other two stories. You know, the other two stories, the shepherd searched diligently and would not stop for the sheep that he had lost, and said, rejoice with me when he found it. And the woman, she was diligent to sweep everything, and she was diligent with every light on in the house and would not stop until she found the coin which she had lost, and she said, rejoice with me. But now we're really at brass tacks. Now we're really at the collision. We have what we presume to be a respectable and elderly father with 2 adult children. And we have a son who's now squandered all of this, and in the Jewish mindset, taking care of pigs in a foreign land, lent himself out to a citizen who is no doubt a pagan. And he is deliberately walking back to what clearly is the representative of Yahweh God. And so for the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they must have been thinking, at long last, we're going to get our question resolved. And so the young man is repeating his speech, And he's having a warpy moment. And I'll explain theologically what a warpy moment is in a minute. But the father, the old man is sitting on the front porch and looking off into the distance like the regal king on the throne that he is. But the young man, he's having a warpy moment. You ever have a warpy moment? You're about to ask a girl out for the first time. Some of you might remember that. Your palms are sweaty and your heart begins to beat. And then it beats up in your neck, and then somehow your heart begins to beat in your ears, and you didn't even know that was possible, and everything goes in slow motion, and then you start sounding kind of weird. Well, the young man is nervous. He has essentially told his father, "Pops, you're dead to me, give me the money," and then wrecked the whole thing. And he's walking back humiliated, and as he's walking back, he's rehearsing his speech, but he's in that warpy phase where he sees the house off in the distance. And his eyes are maybe better than the old man sitting on the throne, on the porch, that Cracker Barrel rocking chair of his. And the young man sees Dad, and now it's just really even worse. What is he going to say to me? Is he going to say that he's disowned me? And he's got that, "I'm not really called," and he's walking in what feels like slow motion. Now, meanwhile, back in the Cracker Barrel rocking chair of the throne, the old man is there. And he's got his staff in his hands. And the Pharisees are thrilled that he has a staff in his hands because that's the stick with which you beat the sun when he draws nigh. The old man sees somebody, a puff of dust up the road. Somebody's kicking up dust on the way, and he recognizes the gait of his younger son, and he looks out and he says, "Wait a minute, I know who that is." And he stands up, leans on his staff, and the Pharisees say, "Here we go, boys. This is what we've been waiting for. He's even got a stick. It's awesome." The young man sees the father stand up. From a distance, everything gets more slow motion and warpy, and now that's all he could hear is, "Foom, foom, foom, foom." And he's mouthing the words to his speech, but he can't even hear his own speech because the dad is about to do something that's going to terrify him in the pit of his stomach, something he's never seen before, because the old man steps forward and pulls his tunic up just a bit, and as he begins stepping forward, he picks up speed, and he is now running full-fledged at the son. And the son has never seen this. And the son can't hear anything now other than, "Woo!" what happens just before you stroke out, because he's pretty sure that his dad's getting a running start. And the Pharisees are going, "This is going to be awesome. This is middle linebacker stuff. The old man is going to smoke this kid like Lawrence Taylor blindsided. This is fantastic." And the son is terrified, and finally they collide. The old man throws his staff and grabs the son and swings him around and around and around, and he says, "Behold, this is my beloved son. He's back. The lost one is back. He's been found. The dead one is revived. Get the ring. Get his robe. Get the sandals. Kill the fattened calf. He's back. He's back." Pharisees are just standing there. Are you kidding me? This is what you think God's doing? They're the older son in the story, you see. The older son is the saddest of all the characters in the story because he doesn't recognize. You see, when that story turns its attention to the elder son, there's something really weird. Most of you won't know this, but that's okay. What is this? Yeah, that's a bass line. Just in case you don't know, here, listen. You didn't know what that was. That's the sound of a party. And there's a party happening inside the house, but the older son is so diligent out in the field doing his job, estranged from the father, that he doesn't recognize what's actually happening. Look at verse 25. It says, "Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring, 'What could these things be?'" Now listen, there are geeky things that are said occasionally in Bible and movie, but this might be the geekiest statement in all of the Bible. This kid hears this, and has to ask, "Excuse me, what is that noise blistering my ears?" The servant's like, "It's music, bro. We're dancing. Don't you remember the first story? The shepherd throws the sheep on his shoulder and says, 'Rejoice with me.' The second story, the woman, she finds the coin. She calls all her gal pals and says, rejoice with me. The father, he's going to walk right up to the oldest son and he's going to say, don't you understand the party that's going on inside? The older son is just full of accusations. He's been busy being holy, and he's angry that he and his friends have never had a party. He says, you've never killed a fattened calf that I might have a party with me and my friends. Isn't it interesting that the Pharisees were so interested in their own little enclave, in their own little friend group, in their whole little holiness huddle? And they weren't interested in coming to the party because the party was filled with sinful wretches and drunks and prostitutes. But that's what Jesus was doing, because he knew that the heartbeat of the Father is to see the fallen and broken world redeemed, to see the work of the Son prevail in every aspect and every inch of all creation, because all creation is groaning for redemption. And Jesus' work is sufficient for the restoration of the glory in every corner of the earth. But the Pharisees and the scribes, they're not interested in that. They're interested in their own little holiness huddle. But what Jesus is interested in, Jesus' heartbeat is what pleases God the Father. And the implication of the story is not merely that all of heaven rejoices, not merely that the angels around the throne of God rejoice, but the Father himself is so thrilled. Look at verse 31 and 32, and with this we'll close. These are the words of the Father. This is the heartbeat of the Father. The Father says to the older son in verse 31, Son, you've always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. We had to celebrate and rejoice. For this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost, has been found. New Hope Church, I am new to this place. I can't tell you what type of people you are. I haven't met you. I'm good with people, but I'm not that fast. You have to decide, do we exist to have a party with our friends? That's what the older son wanted. You've never killed a fattened calf. I want to be comfortable with my friends. I want to have a party with my friends. I want to feel good with my friends. Or do we exist for the pleasure of God the Father, whose heartbeat is the ends of the earth? We have to decide. Do I want to live for my own status quo? Or do I want to think about what the Father loves this Father's Day? It's so interesting. I have 4 children, and when they're little, they don't think about the fact that I'm a human and I might have particular likes. They just do what little kids do. They glue popsicle sticks together or make cards, and they draw weird fat people with stick hands, and they say, that's you, Dad. And you're like, oh, thank you so much. It's likened unto me in every way. But when they grow older and more mature, they begin asking things. My kids have asked me this week, hey, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? You see, that's the shifting of maturity from a self-centered child to a person who recognizes the personhood of their father. And when we're children in the faith, we're so stoked and we're so pleased about being born again, and that's fantastic. Those are the first steps in growth. But what has to happen is that we begin transitioning away from our own self-centered pleasures and status quo, and what we start thinking of is, God invented me for something as my Father, and he has aptitudes and loves and likes. And the Pharisees missed it. They were just about themselves. But Jesus in every way personified the beloved Son, in whom God the Father is well pleased, because he lived and he said, I say what I hear my Father saying, I do what I see my Father doing. He was living, dying, and being raised again for an audience of one, for the pleasure of the Father. We have to decide, what kind of people do we want to be? What kind of church do we want to be? Self-centered? Self-serving, status quo, comfortable, cliquish. Or the kind that runs with the missionary thrust, that missional impulse of a shepherd finding the lost sheep, or the woman sweeping for the lost coin, or the father who literally hikes up his tunic to be able to run full speed out of the joy of restoration. Let's pray together.